Welcome everyone, it's absolutely brilliant to see so many people here, and we know as well that we've had an absolutely fantastic demonstration today, where tens of thousands of young people have taken to the streets to protest against climate change, but also to protest against the system which creates climate change in the first place. We are really delighted to have you all here today for this People's Assembly rally, and we have a quite incredible lineup of speakers who are going to draw together all of the various campaigns, the strikes that we've seen, the demonstrations that we've seen, to give us some perspective on what's going on. Because it's important that we're marching in the streets, it's important that we're down in the picket lines, but it's also important that we have a place where we can come together and hear about the kind of strategy that we're going to require to move forward all of the struggles in which we're involved. So as I say, we've got a fantastic lineup. We're going to hear from people that have been on strike, we're going to hear from people from all sorts of campaigns and trade unions, and so it gives me a great pleasure to introduce the first speaker that we have for you tonight. The first speaker is Laura Pincock, National Secretary of the People's Assembly. Many of you will know of Laura and her campaigning, her tireless campaigning for working class causes over many years. So please, a warm welcome to Laura Pincock.
It's just so lush, Glasgow, isn't it? I walked from that demonstration. Like, I feel like I need a medal because I walked, but I walked from the demonstration to here, and it's just such a beautiful, beautiful city. Thank you so much to Jonathan, by the way, for all of the hard work, and for everybody else who's done any volunteering to make this meeting happen, and for everything that the People's Assembly activists do in Scotland. Thank you so, so much. I am the National Secretary of the People's Assembly, and I'm just going to, before I get into the substance, I'm just going to say a little bit about this. It's a brand new initiative that hasn't actually launched yet, but it exists, but it just hasn't been on social media yet, so it doesn't really exist. And it's called Fund the Fight. It's a People's Assembly Patreon, which is about a monthly given initiative where people can give a little bit of money if they've got anything spare to, as exactly as it says, to fund the fight, because it costs a massive amount to have huge national demonstrations, to put on meetings like this, for volunteer expenses, for all the social media, all of the behind the scenes stuff, the national organising. So yeah, give it a plug, tell people about it, become a patron yourself if you have anything spare. It's been interesting to watch COP, hasn't it, as activists, as people from the Labour movement. We have a global political establishment in the main committed to capitalism, and this particular rancid, destructive, neoliberal incarnation of capitalism that we have here, which has wreaking havoc on the lives of working class people and the planet that we inhabit. We have a political class who are, in my view, undoubtedly aware of the insecurity of our circumstances, but they stick by their free market ideology, and they stick by their politics, endangering us all. And it's been clear that there is an ineptitude of their politics, and they have met in Glasgow and look utterly incompetent in the scale of the crisis. The climate crisis is, of course, the biggest threat facing us all. I think that is undoubtable. And the earth is already showing so much distress, from flooding, extinction of many species, polluted air and water, rising sea levels, some countries experiencing intolerable heat. And we are emerging, many of us really feel this, we are emerging from a global health pandemic. Working class people are experiencing a concentrated and prolonged living standards crisis, with endemic in-work poverty, excessive hours, and we know that these challenges correlate exactly with the sustained attack on trade union rights and freedoms, of which we have some of the most restrictive in the world. And whether you wanted yes or no, or in or out, we have one class struggle. The exploitation of our planet and the exploitation of working class people are part of the same story. So our struggles must unite. We must unite against this brutal economic system to one which is about collective liberation, because we are against war in this room, we are against imperialism, against the unfettered power of global corporations to exploit working class people and the planet, against racist immigration systems. We are for living in peace and love and harmony and in respect for one another. We are also for work which is fulfilling and allows us to live a joyous life. So we obviously have to stand up to a political class who are indifferent, who sit with the knowledge of what their politics does to us, to all of us, but they don't change course. Have we seen anything at COP to tell us that they are going to change course? I don't think so. And lastly, but I think importantly for our movement, it is a complete and utter misconception that there is a conflict between your class and caring about the planet. And what do I mean by that? Well, the characterisation of working class people that somehow we don't care about what happens to the planet is utter nonsense. Or that the characterisation of climate activists do not care at all what happens to working class people and working class people's jobs. That is what the ruling class says about us. That is not what we believe, because what we saw today was that one of the very biggest cheers of all was for Chris Mitchell, obviously, but fundamentally of the message of solidarity and the message of support for the striking cleansing workers. This COP has been our opportunity for our movements to intertwine. In practice, we saw it on the demonstration today. GMB workers, Unison workers, Unite workers, marching side by side with climate justice workers. And long may that continue and grow, because that is what people in power fear the most, isn't it? That actually all of those struggles combine into one unbeatable, powerful, diverse, beautiful force against this brutal economic system. So we must refrain from individualising our worth and our morality. We are not each other's enemy, whether we eat meat or not. We are not each other's enemy, and we are not a barrier as working class people to the survival of our species on Earth, but our collective organised struggle is exactly what will save us and this planet. Thank you very much. Enjoy this meeting. Get involved with people.
I'm not going to talk much between the speakers because we do have a lot of representation today, but that's great because we want to hear from all parts of the movement here in Scotland. So with that, I'm now going to introduce Labour MSP Carol Mockin.
Thanks very much, Jonathan, and thanks so much to the People's Assembly for asking me to speak here. And I really want to thank the speakers to be on a platform with great speakers like this. It's just fantastic. And when I look out and I see so many people that I've known for so long who have made such a difference so far, it makes me realise that we can do more. And Laura spoke about the young people out there, active and interested. And this morning I was at a school in Ayrshire where I represent, and they were having a mini COP, and they were so interested and active, asking me questions about the environment, about the climate, about the Parliament, about how we can change things. And I think that should give us all great hope about the things that can happen. I don't want to speak for too long because I know there are a lot of really excellent speakers to come, but I just want to say I think it is by coming together that we do harness the energy that we have to try and get economic justice and change and equality, and we need to shout, and we need to shout loud, and really we need to not let them shut us up, which is what they do, trying to do. So I think, you know, I'm speaking in a room of people who know that the climate crisis is caused by capitalism, and it is one made worse by capitalism every single day. And if we want to fix it, we have to end the pursuit of endless growth and gain. And we just need to say that. We need to say that loud and clear. We need to say it on all the platforms that we can, whether we're here, whether we're out in our communities, whether we're talking in the Scottish Parliament or the Westminster Parliament. We need to talk about it. We need to also say that it isn't about pitting nations against nations. We don't want to say who is the best, who's got the best carbon footprint. We actually want to hold to account the worst polluters and have some cast iron guarantees about what we're going to do to change that. If we're, you know, in Scotland, I think sometimes in Scotland, in Scottish politics, we speak as if we're better than some of the other Western countries, and we're not at all. We need to be held to account in the Scottish Parliament. Scottish politicians need to understand that there are things that we do. And if we want to get serious about the crisis, we have to put an end to sort of global corporations thinking that they can just dictate to people in whichever country they want every single bit of technology and innovation. Let's face it, the likes of Amazon, you know, they have technologies that public money, you know, were the innovation behind this, and we can't forget that. And they then reap the rewards of that, and it is frankly disgusting, and we need to talk about that. I think to end, I want to say that, and I hope there are people in the room who would agree that in 2019, the Labour Manifesto was making steps towards a genuine green industrial revolution, and it talked about tough actions. It was not perfect, but I think it was a serious attempt to change the way in which we talk about these factors and challenge government. You know, and it almost made it. You know, we had people who believed in that manifesto and wanted that to happen. And it didn't, and we know there's lots of reasons why that happened, but I think it should give us some hope to keep challenging these people. Labour and other parties who argue that they want economic justice, social justice, they have to back the spirit that we had under Corbyn and wake up to the lethal dangers of climate change. I came from an area which was a mining community, and that community had well-paid jobs, and people could look after their families, and when it was taken from them, nothing was done to support these communities. And to this day, some of those communities are desolate. And we have to say we will not accept that in the transformation to new energy jobs and to new climate policies. We have to invest in what we have, which is our communities. We point to China and Brazil and we blame them, but actually we have to do better. We have to do better by the planet and by the workers. And if I can just end by saying, if we get our house in order and we care about workers, about their families, about the planet, about their children, then my children will not grow up having to worry about which country is going to disappear under the waves next. Solidarity, and thank you.
The next speaker I'm going to introduce, Rosa Sally, is one of the SNP's activists here in the city and was also the first refugee, someone from a refugee background, to stand to become an MSP in Scotland, and she's a well-known activist in lots of different campaigns. So please give a warm welcome now to Rosa Sally.
Thanks for inviting me to speak, and I appreciate that. I think most of the speakers talked about that the cause of global warming and it's capitalism. We are gathered now in Glasgow and we welcome the COP26, which is a great opportunity for our city. But we need to take radical decisions and be more ambitious and not just promises. Of course, the Scottish government and Parliament have plans and actions to take our country forward. I want to explain further though. I am an activist and I have been since I was 15 years old. Of course, I believe in independence, and that's why I stood as one of the candidates in my great city of Glasgow. It is very catastrophic to see that countries like Chad and Bangladesh are being affected by our emissions, carbon emissions. They have very low carbon emissions, but these poor countries are being affected by our actions in developing countries, especially in the higher income countries. The monster is capitalism, an economic system driven by hunger for profit, a system that has exploited both human labor and nature. We need to put people before profit. We are against austerity, and we see austerity day by day from the Tories. And universal credit, people are living, they cannot live by the money they receive under universal credit. And the scale of the problem and the roots of climate crisis is inequality and poverty, and the climate crisis is basically affecting this. We also see many refugees leaving their countries because of war, and investing in shipbuilding for war and renewal of Trident. These are all interlinked together. We can't just talk about changing the climate, helping the environment and forgetting these issues. These are big issues. And most of these countries are very rich in oil, and we need to know that. Burning coal, oil, gas is responsible for almost 80% of our carbon emissions since the Industrial Revolution. This is not something new. We are talking about the climate change, but this is not something new. Just 100 private companies are responsible for 2/3 of all greenhouse gases since the mid-19th centuries. So really, in the 1950, a Swedish physician, Stephen Arvinus, sorry if I don't pronounce his name, but he warned burning fossil fuels back then that will raise global temperature. But this was ignored and denied by big fossil corporations. Let's name them. Why not? BP and Shell, who are now buying exhibition spaces in Glasgow. These are fossil fuel, they are hypocrites and criminals returning to the scene of their crimes. They are the big cooperatives who've profited from working class people, from our environment, who've affected our lives and our future generation. And they have been they've denied this for their own profits, like what we saw with big tobaccos, how they denied there was any health issues selling cigarettes. So this is recently they've abandoned that, climate change happens, so they now want to do something about it. Let's not forget though, there are profit companies, they are still businessmen, and they're attacking activists, trade unionists, laws. We've seen them, how they attacking social benefits. They're attacking us in all aspects of our society. And this is a really dangerous place we are at this moment, because they want to take away our rights. And class is a big issue. This is a fight between classes. We cannot say, and I think Laura mentioned, it is working classes and youth activists have to unite against these capitalist polluters for saving our planet. This is the most important fight, I would say. However, to have a radical transformation of Green New Deal is needed. I think we need to go beyond, as I started my speech saying, we have to be more bold and ambitious. We have to look into free public transport. It has been done, like Luxembourg, a country who've gone forward. And we need to be more ambitious. Universal basic service and income, this is something that we should pursue as a country in Scotland. We have our NHS, and we have to be thankful because it was because of the NHS that we have survived the pandemic, and this was because of the working class people who have fought for our NHS. It was not given, it was fought for. And we are going to invest in National Care Service, but we need to be more giving hope to the young people, and we need to create 1,000 green jobs. And I think to go forward, we first need to fix our transport and interlink our buses. Okay, let's be honest. How hard was it to get here today? We have to try to imagine the future and how we can make it easier for future generation. And renewable energies and democratic public ownership are the way forward. And sorry, I have bored you a bit, but I hope that together we can go forward and to have imaginative ideas to put in place. As a country, I believe we can do that in Scotland, and we can push our government to be more radical. We've already have put onshore wind, which is the most cost-effective forms of bringing a net zero economy and transition, and I hope that we have more bold ideas to go forward.
The next speaker I'm going to introduce from the PCS, Lynn Henderson, someone you'll have seen on many picket lines and on many demonstrations and campaigns. So please give a warm welcome to Lynn Henderson.
For being seen on picket lines, Lynn Henderson, PCS Trade Union. I just wanted to kind of start by saying I wasn't at the demonstration this afternoon, and I hear it was absolutely fantastic. I will be there tomorrow, because today at lunchtime I was actually on a Zoom call, and on a Zoom call with officers around the Driving Vehicle Standards Agency, where we've been in dispute with the employer, which is Civil Service Union. The employer is the government, UK and Scottish. We've been in dispute with the employer in DVSA over extending the working day of driving examiners to include an extra test every day. But through threatening industrial action, we've actually managed to win a victory. So today, we were preparing to celebrate that victory, and I was doing that today. Lunchtime instead of being on the demonstration. But I've been living in Glasgow. Probably you'll know from my accent I'm not from Glasgow, but I've been living in this city for more than half of my adult life. And it's a city that is inspiring to live in. And it's a city that during the COP has taken on a really strange kind of feel to it. I live quite near COP. I've been watching police boats going up and down the Clyde. I've been watching helicopters over my head. I've been barricaded into my community. There's been demonstrations up and down my street. And I've been also watching delegates arriving from around the world. I've been watching the corporates, but I've been seeing the people from the NGOs from the global south come in and being excited to be here and really hoping for change. And I think it's really interesting that the COP is taking place on the site of what was the industrial Glasgow, on the sites of where shipbuilding was. Where I live is a site, where I live is a site that was the locomotive engineering works, where 10,000 Glaswegians worked back in the day to build engines to sail on the Clyde around the world and run the trains around the world. And over the last 50 years or so, Glasgow has become a post-industrial city, because the famous Clyde shipyards 50 years ago right now was where we had a worker sitting at the UCS, and I'm also involved in the Jimmy Reid Foundation, which we are celebrating at the moment, a number of events to celebrate the time of the UCS working. We're also a city where the poverty gap hasn't got any better over time and over different governments and since devolution, whether it's been Labour, SNP or Labour, Lib Dem, that we have a life expectancy in this city that is not becoming of a first world nation. And there's a lot to do for domestic governments and global governments to begin to address these things in our city and around the world. I also just wanted to say, when I came in the room, I said I saw Francis Curran, and I said I can't remember the last time I was in the QM, which for people that aren't from Glasgow was one of the sites of student activism, but also lots of gigs and so on. When I was a student at Glasgow University, unfortunately I was 30 and pregnant, so I wasn't in here very often. I was in the library quite a lot. But the first time I was in here, I was 15. And I was in here because I was a member of the Leith Peace Group, which was part of Scottish CND. And I was on my way from Leith to Faz Lane to take part in an early morning round around the base. And we stayed overnight, we slept in here, which wasn't that pleasant. I was only 15 and the bar was open. And I think, why did my parents let me come? Why did they let me come? Because they saw CND as something that my geography teacher was part of, and it was kind of like a school trip. And I'm really glad they let me come because I've been lifelong, therefore committed to the anti-nuclear cause, and Faz Lane is just a few miles down the road from the COP as well. But anyway, turning my attention to the climate crisis, climate action, strike action. There's a few things that I think others have said, and I think I need to just restate what we mean by a just transition. We mean, as trade unionists, as people from the wider labour movement, that a just transition must always include social protections, and radical transformation of social security, and radical transformation of what we would call green jobs. Climate change solutions also have to be rooted in economic, social, environment and political justice. And that we need a transformative transition that addresses what I've been describing there as the inherent inequality, not just here in Glasgow, but globally, that the current neoliberal capitalist system upholds. We also need public services that are designed and that are critical to adapting to climate change. And in my union, as a public sector union, we demand a fully resourced civil service and an end to all outsourcing and privatisation as part of that package. We also need a pro-public goods approach, and that's one that brings energy, transport, water, etc. under public ownership and democratic control. And there can never be climate justice without worker justice. Whether it's the bin workers in Glasgow at the moment striking for decent pay, whether it's my members in the DVLA in Swansea who are disputing over COVID safety in the workplace, or whether it's outsourced toilet attendants in the Royal Parks in London who are striking for union recognition and were on strike all through October, or whether it's the workers in the Scottish Government who are demanding a 4-day working week, because it is possible to do here in Scotland, or whether it's workers around the world involved in their struggles. So just a little bit about my union and its involvement in climate action. PCS has had a long and proud record of supporting action on the environment and climate change. Our first motion passed at a conference on this was back in 2006. In 2019, our National Executive declared a climate emergency on behalf of our members. And it wasn't just a token gesture. That has been put into a real call to employers with real demands to negotiate sustainable workplaces and working practices to tackle the climate emergency. PCS also has supported the 1 Million Jobs campaign. And PCS has always been clear that you can't address climate change just by talking about science, that the social and economic are as important in environmental justice and as is political justice. So therefore we need to be more than talking about energy transition, renewable energy, about decarbonising the economy. And some of the chatter I've heard from delegates walking around my neighbourhood at the moment is all about the corporates. It's all about the corporates. So about corporate solutions. We need to do a lot more than that. We need to transform the inequality and end precarious work, fire and rehire, outsourcing, pay cuts and privatisation in public services. And we need to ensure that climate solutions are also ones that are about equality of people from all characteristics in our society. And if we're building back at this republic, strong public services, I think, are vital to addressing climate change in every way that we can. So there's a lot of discussion around the COP about market mechanisms and technological fixes. They won't themselves address the action that's needed, as I said, as a public solution is required. The UK government's net zero carbon strategy last week mentions just transition once, and it mentions trade unions only 4 times, and only there where they're already in established relationships. The Billions Committee to Trident Renewal, the biggest increase in military spending in 70 years. And decarbonising the economy will impact on everyone to a lesser degree, and how we work and how we travel and how we live. My union has a pamphlet that has 10 demands for the COP, and I'm not going to go through every one of these in detail. I'll just give you the headlines of them. 1 is workers' involvement. 2 is statutory rights for workplace green reps, which we do have in some of the government sectors, but not everywhere. Energy democracy, and that's about public ownership, as I said, of the energy sector. The creation of a national climate service, an adequately resourced tax collection system that puts tax avoidance and evasion at its heart, and a just transition commission UK-wide, not just here in Scotland. Support also for calls like those of the Scottish Government workers who are calling for a 4-day working week and an insourcing of all outsourced workers on government contracts. We want to strengthen the health and safety provisions to enable workers to take on the climate challenge in their workplace, including being able to walk out of the job when it's not safe or not appropriate. And finally, a repeal of all anti-trade union laws. Just a wee challenge here, but at the forefront of the campaign to fight back, we need to support the workers that need our support right now. So we, as a public sector trade union, are asking you to stand with us and make these demands on this government and all governments, and that way we'll get climate justice and workers' justice too. Thank you.
Now we're going to ask the next group of speakers to come up. The point in having representation is to show the kind of power that we can have as a coalition of people, of unions, of campaigns, of people that are fighting back. The idea is that we come together. We come together, we're stronger. If we're fighting each other's campaigns, if we're drawing the links between all of the different struggles. So the next group of speakers, really interesting. We're going to hear people that's been on strike. We've got Danielle that's come over from France, which is really incredible that you're here with us in Glasgow. We're so delighted you're here at the rally. And we're also going to hear from United Hospitality as well. And then after that, we'll wrap up with a couple of final speeches. Now the next speaker, I want everyone to give a huge round of applause to, because the RMT have shown there's power in a trade union. You go on strike, you make your demands, you get people around the table, and that's how you win. You actually win for ordinary people, and you do so through struggle and through being part of a trade union. And RMT, they're in the vanguard in many ways when it comes to the trade union movement. So it's a real pleasure and it's an honour to now invite Michael Hawke to speak from the RMT.
First and foremost, solidarity from the RMT. I'm proud, as an ex-miner incidentally, to be on the stage at the People's Assembly, a fight in the union, a campaign in the union that fights for the justice for the workers. And we certainly make no apology for the fight, the campaigns that we have actually embarked upon, because our fight, our campaign is for the equality, justice and fairness. And we make no apology to no one, particularly when we're actually fighting the bosses. Now there are two themes to my contribution tonight. The first contribution, right, is in relation to Scotland's railway. And we've actually embarked upon a campaign, and it includes the four rail unions in Scotland, RMT, TESA, Unite and ASLEF. And that's quite unique. It's quite unique in the sense that for the first time ever, to my knowledge, certainly since I've been involved, that the four unions have actually came together in order to actually fight a just state fight, in order to actually save Scotland's railway. And the reason we actually done that was the simple fact that a Billy O'Way ScotRail, who are actually on their way out, and rightly so because they've underperformed and got away with murder for years under the banner of the franchising. Now, a Billy O'Way ScotRail have actually produced a report. It's called the Docherty Report. And the Docherty Report has disaster for Scotland's railway written all over it. It means job losses, it means less investment, and more importantly, what it means for the most vulnerable people within society, it means denial to access to Scotland's railway. That's unacceptable as far as the RMT, ASLEF, Unite and TESA are concerned. Hence the reason why the four unions came together. And one of the main reasons why the four unions came together, our industrial relations are an absolute shambles. Industrial relations is all about bullying, harassment in order to bully the trade unions into submission. And certainly they never got away with that when it came to the RMT, because the RMT, they certainly have a great history and a great background of fighting back in order to actually win fairness and justice for workers. And what we've actually done as a result is we've actually produced our own report that actually stands up for Scotland's railway, a report that actually advocates the investment, a report that actually advocates support for Scotland's railway, and a report that actually advocates the access to Scotland's railway for the most vulnerable people within the society, because the slash and burn approach by a Billy ScotRail, Transport Scotland and the Scottish State Government is unacceptable as far as the four unions is concerned. So we had a launch last week. And it was a fantastic launch. We got the maximum publicity. However, we're not just really going to sit in our laurels and allow the politicians, the Scottish State Government, in order to actually ensure that Scotland's railway is actually invested with jobs and actually gives support to the most vulnerable people within society, and it gives jobs with decent terms, decent conditions. We need to actually campaign. Because part of the Docherty report means 300 trains less a day. 300 trains less a day in over a 12-month period. What that means is 100,000 trains less a year. Now, We're in a situation where COP26, we were trying to encourage people with the green approach in order to stop using the cars and actually use public transport. Now with this slash and burn approach, by running less trains within Scotland, it's going to have the opposite effect. Hence the reason for the rail union's report that actually supports Scotland's railway. I think it's important also to actually make a reference also to the industrial relations within the railways in Scotland. As I said earlier, it's an absolute disaster, and it's got disaster written all over it. And what we actually need to do is we need to have industrial relations at the top of our agenda. The top of our agenda, because in order to actually have a railway that's fit for purpose, that actually supports workers and supports a railway, we need to actually have industrial relations that actually supports workers and supports the most vulnerable people within the society. Now, the money that's actually been spent on Scotland's railway, because we've been told that over the last 18 months when RNT embarked upon the industrial action, that there was no money. And if you want a pay increase for your members, then you're going to have to sell hard-earned terms and conditions. Now, we've been referenced as key workers, essential workers, and we've been treated with contempt. The same key workers, the same essential workers who came to their work every day, taking the risk every day, and taking the same risk back to their families every day. Not letting the bosses sit in their house and get a bigger pocket. That's unacceptable as far as RNT is concerned. And the same companies, Abilio ScotRail and Circle Caledonian received £36 million in EMAs, emergency measures agreements, that they actually received in order for them to actually come round and say that there is no money in order to actually give key workers a pay rise. Unacceptable as far as the RNT is concerned, and RNT took industrial action. We took industrial action over an 18-month period. We've been in dispute with Abilio ScotRail over the last 8 months, and I'm pleased to say last week common sense prevailed, where we got round the table and we actually came out with a deal, and we ended up with common sense prevailing for justice, common sense prevailing for the fairness, and common sense prevailing for the workers' fairness at the end of the day. So that was a fantastic result as far as the RNT is concerned, because what we've done is we've held the bosses' feet to the fire. That's what we've done. And what we need to do also is find justice and fairness and equality for the Circle Caledonian sleeper workers, because these workers are faced with the same terms and conditions that's been faced by Abilio ScotRail. If you want a pay increase, then you're going to have to sell hard-earned terms and conditions. That's unacceptable as far as the RNT is concerned. So we're looking forward to a positive future when Abilio ScotRail get their marching orders. And we're hopeful, under the operator of last resort, being the people who will actually take over Scotland's railway. And top of the agenda, it has to be workers' rights, workers' jobs, workers' terms, and workers' conditions. Because what we actually need is an accessible railway, a clean railway, an affordable railway, and a safe railway, a railway for all that has the vision for the four main rail unions in Scotland that stands shoulder to shoulder with the workers. And I'm absolutely convinced with that right approach, with the right industrial relations being right and correct, I'm absolutely convinced we can actually deliver an absolute fantastic railway for the future that actually supports the most vulnerable people within society and gives access to Scotland's railway, including the disabled people within Scotland. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for that, and we're going to need that moving forward when we're rebuilding from the pandemic. We have to have workers at the centre, our communities at the centre, and we cannot have a return to business as usual. Business as usual has failed. ordinary people, not just in Scotland, but right across the world. And it's therefore a real pleasure to now introduce, from insubordinate France, an MP in the French Parliament, Daniel Bono, who's come here to Glasgow to speak to this rally and tell us about the struggle in France and like the struggles internationally. Daniel.
Thank you very much for inviting me to People's Assembly in this rally. It's a real pleasure, and also it's a reminder of the mass movement we are all part of, not just here in Glasgow, and as was shown this afternoon by all the young people marching into the streets, but I think it echoes over marches all around the world, millions and millions of people demanding our leaders to act and stop blah blah blah, but really act to face climate change. And I think it's very inspiring because I'm going to show my age a little bit now. I've been involved in the anti-globalization movement for some decades now, and I'm really excited to see how the consciousness, not just among young people, not just among people who are already sensitive to that issue, environmental activists, but all around the world, working class people have become aware not just of the impact of climate change, but also of the way it impacted their life, their well-being, and also the responsibilities that lie upon our leaders. I want to share with you the past experience that we've been living in France and witnessed in France, especially a very, I think, significant movement, which was the Yellow Vest movement in France. Just not because I wear the yellow, and that's a very bright and nice color, but this Yellow Vest movement, you may have heard about it, because it was actually triggered by some neoliberal green policy, which meant to higher fuel tax in France, and that's one way to see, climate justice, which is actually climate injustice, because this tax hike was very unfair, because it meant that working class people, and especially people living in rural areas, far from common, transport, and especially train stations, and in the most remote places in France, were most impacted by this fuel tax hike. And it started from really everywhere in France, except where we most expected, because as climate activists and working class activists, we're used to movements that are really similar, with trade union and stuff. And this movement really surprised everybody, because those were regular people. Those were working class people, unemployed, retirees, people who got pensioners, I think you said that's the word, that came out of nowhere and started gathering around the country, and started this absolutely incredible people's movement, because those were the people most impacted by the lack of public transport, by the way the train system had been broken by neoliberal policies that were impacted by the rising cost of living, and you had there, this protest was a protest against all of it. And at the same time, those people were saying, we're not anti-environmental policies, we're very aware of what is happening, and we are the most impacted actually by climate change. What we want the government to realize is we just can't, we can't keep going like that. We can't be the one shouldering all the work actually, and all the loss. And this movement, I think, was very incredible because there was this slogan that very encapsulates the rising consciousness of the relationship between social justice and climate justice. It says, end of the world, end of the month, same culprits are same people responsible, same fight. And I think it's a great summary of what this movement was. And this is a movement that was, despite being vilified by mainstream media, despite being called many awful names, that actually gained massive support in the population. And actually pushed the Macron government and the Macron power, really shook it to the point that we thought it was really a turning point where it could have been toppled, really, because that was the strength of this movement and the fact that it really came from the depth of the French society. And I think it's also important to tell you that this is a movement also that was made of people from various backgrounds, from who may have voted very different things during the previous election, and there were people from the far right who tried actually to infiltrate the movement and to change the course of the movement. They have been campaigning against international migrant policies that were happening at the same time, and they were trying to push their agenda inside the movement, but they were defeated because what put people together onto the streets, what they wanted, what their demands were about social justice, were about fiscal justice, and were about environmental justice. So this was a very learning moment, even for us activists, because that was something which surprised us, and which showed us that the depth of the consciousness inside the population. And to me, it's a very telling moment. It's a very telling experience that I wanted to share with you. That shows how much importance, how much strategical is the alliance between social justice fights, working class people fights, and climate justice. Not just because the working class people are, as I said before, the most impacted by climate change, starting with farmers and agricultural workers who've been intoxicated by all the pesticides and stuff like that, but all sorts of workers in the building industry and in all areas. The first people who are impacted by climate change are the working class people. But I think on the other hand, the first people who are the most capable of facing it and finding a solution to climate change are working class people. Because working class people are the best one to know how we can change our way, our process of working in order for them to be more efficient and environmentally efficient. And I think that this is something very important to tell and to build our movement around. Working class people are the future of the climate change, climate justice movement. Because if we want to rebuild the world in order to fix climate change, the one who will be able to do that in all the areas, in all the economic sectors, are working class people. And I think that's what our movement should be about the first person, the very people who are at the roots of the world we want to build. And I think after what happened with the COVID crisis, when the world literally stopped, and the only reason why most of us, especially in Western Europe, survived is because of the working class people the healthcare workers, invisible people or invisibilized people who have been looked down, looked upon by, you know, the society as a whole, and that showed to the world how fragile, how precarious our civilization was, and that it only existed and survived thanks to those very humble people, invisible people, for friends, especially migrant people, migrant women, women of color, especially in the healthcare service. And I think it was a moment of reckoning for millions around the world, what we owe them as a civilization. But we can't stop with those existential realization. We have to make it happen. You know the saying, if not now when, if not us who. There's no time like now, and there's nobody else but us to do it. So, just telling you a last little thing about the Yellow Vest movement. There was this chant that the Yellow Vest movement popularized in France, and I think it's a very fitting for our rally today. And the chant was said, I'm going to say it in French first, because it rhymes and it sounds good in French. It says, pour l'honneur des travailleurs et pour un monde meilleur, même si Macron ne veut pas, nous on est là. And it means for workers' dignity or honor, and for a better world, even if Macron, but you can put, instead of Macron, you can say Johnson or BP or anybody, you know, the power that they, even if they don't want, here we are. So thank you very much. We're here to stay, to find, and to win.
We want to make sure that we are, as I say, touching on a range of campaigns. Brian Simpson is someone that you might know, especially if you're in the hospitality sector, because he'll be knocking on your door of your bar saying, are you unionised? The next question will be, when are we going on strike? Welcome Brian Simpson to talk about unionised hospitality.
That's always a good introduction when the chair says you may know him and several people laugh. It's a good start. But it's been a difficult 20 months for our class, but it's been a particularly difficult month for hospitality workers. Since March last year, 30,000 croupiers, housekeepers, baristas, waitresses have lost their jobs in this city alone. 30,000. According to Forth, which is the most trusted employee data software in the industry, the hospitality workforce shrunk by 26% last year compared to 2019. That equates to 650,000 job losses across the UK, just in hospitality. Of course, the vast majority of these workers weren't terminated by small family-run businesses that could or were struggling to get by. They were sacked by multinationals who sought to use this pandemic to restructure their companies in order to minimise labour costs and maximise profit. Behemoths like the Marriott Group, the largest hotel chain in the world, a company that despite the pandemic still made £3 billion in clear profit alone last year. They refused to furlough all of their casual workers, mostly migrant women, because they did not want to pay the national insurance and pension contributions, which for each worker would have cost £150 a month. But the Marriott Group didn't want to pay it, despite the job retention scheme. The Compass Group, the largest hospitality employer in the world, an organisation which owns and runs the COP26 venue just down the road, the Scottish Events Campus, 90% owned by Glasgow City Council. They sacked 630 workers by Facebook post. The G1 Group, where you will be aware of if you've not worked with them in the past, Scotland's largest private hospitality employer, they sacked 2,000 workers by phone. Stefan King got his general managers to phone every single worker and sack them over the phone, despite the job retention scheme. The casual dining group that owns Bella Italia, Café Rouge and Las Iguanas, they sacked 1,900 workers. They invited them onto a conference call telling them it was an update. They sacked them and made them redundant on the spot. No notice, no consultation, no opportunity to put forward alternatives. In each of these examples though, instead of accepting what was done to them, these workers got together with their colleagues, they joined their union, many for the first time, and they fought back. They forced some of the largest employers in the country to reinstate them, but not just on 80% wages, on 100% wages. In some cases, they won premium payments of 135% of their wages for those that were still working through the pandemic. At the G1 group, our members got together and organised a national social and mainstream media campaign that forced one of the most infamous employers in this country to back down within 48 hours, and they were all reinstated. At the Marriott Group, a workforce of majority young women and migrant workers clubbed together and demanded fair and equitable treatment, and they won. They won reinstatement. At the Scottish Events Campus, and I promise it does relate to COP in some way, at the Scottish Events Campus, our members launched a mass collective grievance and public media campaign which forced Compass not only to reinstate them on 100% wages, but also to pay them £12.30 an hour in the Louisa Jordan when that venue was turned into a vaccination centre. As a direct consequence of that win, Compass have just agreed a new venues agreement with Unite, which will apply across every single one of their venues, which includes the Scottish Events Campus, Excel Centre, Wimbledon, Wembley, Twickenham. In it, they commit to the real living wage of £9.50 an hour, which will go up in November, regardless of age. They're going to implement a proactive sexual harassment policy. They're going to offer minimum hour contracts, but most importantly, they're granting Unite access to all 17 venues. And where was that first rolled out? At the Scottish Events Campus. From a small group of young workers just last April taking action to stop unnecessary redundancy, their action is going to benefit 60,000 workers across the UK. And now in Glasgow we've got a branch of 2,500 housekeepers, chefs, waitresses, croupiers to show for it, organising against some of the most exploitative conditions in the UK economy. Fire and rehire, poverty pay, zero-hour contracts and sexual harassment. Of course, we've got a long history, as others, as Lynn has said before, in this city of workers coming together in the face of austerity or mass redundancy, with creative ideas to fight back. It's 50 years, as Lynn says, since 6,000 shipyard workers on the Upper Clyde refused to accept Heath's government diktat to close their workplace and led one of the most important industrial actions of the 20th century. They knew that if they just occupied the yards, they would be forced out in days, but by the full force of the state. So they developed a plan to keep the workplace open. They used cooperation and solidarity rather than the micromanagement that they'd been used to. And they built ships faster and stronger for the next few years. It was a genius stroke which brought together workers, but it also brought the public behind them, and the people of Glasgow marched with them. That is what Chris Mitchell is doing today. That's what the bin workers are doing today through social media and Twitter. They're getting the public behind them, and that's why Glasgow's backing the bin strikers. I recently had the pleasure of speaking alongside the workplace leaders of the Lucas Aerospace plant in Birmingham, workers who, in the face of mass redundancy, put together an alternative plan for how their workplace should be run and the products that they should produce. Instead of fighter jets and bombs, they designed heating systems for council houses, hospital ventilators and wind turbines. We learn from the workers of Lucas and the Upper Clyde that the politicians don't make decisions for the benefit of our class unless we force them to. That's why during COP, alongside cleansing workers, teaching assistants, rail workers, bus workers, the hospitality workers of this city, the people that are serving the likes of Joe Biden in £800 a night hotel rooms will be taking action to demand a bigger slice of the pie. As well as direct actions outside some of the city's poshest hotels, on the 9th of November, we shall be bringing together hospitality workers from across the world to develop organising strategies which aim to drive up standards across the lowest paid and most precarious sector. Bringing together the fight for climate justice and workers' rights. On some of your seats you should have a black leaflet, if you can get it out if you haven't already, and scan the QR code. It's very 2006. But if you can scan the QR code and come along, to hear firsthand how hotel workers in Africa are organising for vaccines, how housekeepers in Boston are fighting mass fire and rehire, and how chefs in Norway are campaigning against sexual harassment. Their message, and ultimately the message of this rally and today and tomorrow, is that working people run this thing. We run this economy, not politicians or business owners meeting 2 miles away. And it's only by combining the strategies of mass industrial action with the disruptive tactics of the environmental movement that we're going to force the hand of these world leaders. That is our task, and that's why the People's Assembly is such an important vehicle. Thanks.
We're going to start with someone who was on the streets today, someone who's been organising the demonstrations that we've seen with Fridays for Future, and not just that, in many other ways as well. I'm going to now introduce to you from the demonstration, Paul McHale.
For having it. There's a slight disclaimer that at 3 o'clock this morning I was finalising our speaker programme. So anything that comes out of my mouth, I'm frazzled. That's the long and short of it. I'll also take this opportunity to put to bed a press rumour which got started this morning when one of our activists did an interview. And she was asked what our security contract was with GMB, who were providing security for our march apparently. Chris and Sean and everyone were apparently providing security in the eyes of the press. But that's not true. Chris did ask me when he came up to do a speech, by the way, if I thought it would be advisable that he threw himself into the crowd when he finished. So I talked him down, he didn't. I'm not entirely sure the press would have caught. No, so we were asked a lot when we were in the run-up to organising these kind of things, whether we're hopeful for things like COP. I think the fact that we're asked whether we're hopeful for things like COP shows just how far we still have to turn the dial on climate change. Yeah, that we're even asked these questions shows that. I mean, of course we're not hopeful for a positive outcome from COP, because locally and internationally, COP failed before it even began. As a result of a consciously cruel vaccine apartheid perpetuated by this country and blocking the TRIPS waiver, this is the most exclusionary COP that we've ever had. So internationally, we failed, but locally we failed. Look at the fact that we magicked up an integrated transport card that we've been asking for years. By the way, it's ridiculously embarrassing because a lot of our guys have these cards, they're delegates. So they get on the subway and they're just able to walk straight on to get their cards, and there I am with the machine tapping in my details to get my card. It's embarrassing, but we failed before we even began. That there's even a discussion that COP might save the planet shows how far we have to go in realising the real causes of climate change. It's impossible that COP could ever save the planet or avert the threat of climate catastrophe, because the world leaders, the corporations and the institutions are those who caused it. Those who are in the SEC just now, they're the people that caused the climate crisis. I mean, on Wednesday, for goodness sake, the NYT Climate Hub platformed the vice chair at BlackRock. I mean, if that doesn't tell you how far we still have to go, I don't know what will. Lots of folk will tell you that the failure of COP shows that our system is broken, that capitalism is failing. Capitalism is working exactly by design. It's working our system is doing exactly what it's supposed to. The logic of capitalism will always bring about climate catastrophe, and it's incredibly important that we remember that, because on a planet of finite resources, when a system is characterised by extraction, when a system is characterised by exploitation and the gross mass accumulation of wealth, it will always accelerate global warming. It will always risk extinction, because that's the logical conclusion of mass extraction. I'll talk now about Fridays for Future and the youth climate movement, because it's worth doing, because when I first got involved, I was sceptical of the climate movement. I think a lot of people still are, and sometimes rightfully, because there's the idea that a lot of young guys getting together can be a bit of a gimmick sometimes, and I was worried about that when I first got involved, and I was very conscious of it. But I've been entirely dissuaded, because I realised that FFF and climate strikes across the country mobilised incredible amounts of young people to the streets. I mean, today we brought tens of thousands of people to the streets behind a banner which read "The people united will never be defeated." Any movement which has the capability to do that and bring together the broad coalition in the way that we did today is worthy of our solidarity. And when I realised that, I got much, much more involved. I think what FFF and the climate movement does, or has done for my generation, is similar to what the referendum did in 2014, where we saw a mass growth in consciousness, a mass growth in, there you go, slurring my words, and that's because I've been up for too long. The consciousness that the referendum built has been mirrored in the consciousness that FFF has built. So it's been responsible for a mass growth in education and political consciousness amongst young people. It's been responsible for a huge increase in the awareness of the inhumanity of capitalism, the crushing realities of historical and neo-colonial extraction. And more people know that, more young people know about that as a result of the climate movement, even if they're just joining in chants which talk about system change. That's a huge achievement. And don't doubt that from those chants people go and they read and they learn. And that's what really drives the climate movement. It also plays an incredibly important role just now, because as war is waged on young people, both from Tory governments at Westminster and in a concocted culture war designed purely to polarise us and divide us, FFF and the climate movement stands at the heart of that, but stands united and together rather than giving in to those ridiculous wars. Our strike today, then, I'll talk about that because it's worth talking about. Because as soon as we saw workers mobilising and it looked like there were going to be strikes ahead of COP, we realised that we had to get our act together and we had to stand in solidarity and organise something which properly linked the climate movement and the labour movement. Because we're fighting the same thing, whether it's the exploitation of labour or the exploitation of finite resources, we are united in our enemy and in our opponent. So, we spoke to the guys at GMB, we organised something special. I think today, I'm still incredibly proud of the coalition that we brought together today. We took some of our international activists down to the depot yesterday, which was an interesting experience. So the Swedes turned up and we're down there, and they got the van, right, because they're hungry, because admittedly it's 8 in the morning, they've not had their breakfast yet. They go for the van, they're all vegetarian, right, because the climate activists and vegetarians, and it goes hand in hand. I'm not veggie, I should say. Don't applaud that, it's not good. And these guys got to the van and asked for a vegetarian option, and all they're offered is a tatty scone. So once I'd explained to them what a tatty scone was, they were then asked what sauce they would like. And this poor guy, Anton, I'll never let him forget this, asked for garlic sauce on his tatty scone. And then there was a whole other situation where they asked for a cappuccino and were told that because you could only have black coffee. It was quite an experience. But that's the solidarity that we have created, bringing Austrians, Germans, people from the most affected areas by climate change through the picket lines, and that's something that we're all really proud of. Because isolating our struggles only puts us at a disadvantage. Uniting our struggles against exploitation is the only way that we ever stand any chance of winning a better world. And making solidarity more than a slogan, showing up, is the most important part of that. Lynn mentioned before, and Brian as well, that COP is taking place on the banks of the Clyde. Today, historically, industrial heartlands and all of that. Today, our march concluded at George Square, where 100 years ago, the British establishment deployed tanks, of course, in response to what was called by the Scottish Secretary a Bolshevist uprising. Today, we're fighting the same thing that they were in the days of Red Flag Side when they fought for a 40-hour week. And the same solidarity which brought people onto the streets then brought people onto the streets today, or at least I like to hope so. We will win our fight for a radical, just transition that doesn't leave anybody behind and which beats capitalism, because we don't have a choice. Because if we don't win, we don't have anything else. Today and tonight, I have immense hope, and it's a reminder of that immense hope. So thank you very much for coming today, if you did, and thanks for having me tonight.
Thanks, Jonathan, and thanks everyone for coming, and thanks very much to the People's Assembly for putting on this meeting. I think it's really fantastic that we're having a People's Assembly rally during COP. I think it's really important. So as other speakers have said, this is kind of a COP of two halves in many ways, isn't it? And then the one half, you've got the world leaders behind their kind of walls of police and barriers and so on, and they're kind of being predictably disappointed. I don't think any of us went into this expecting that they were going to actually pull out a meaningful solution and save the planet. And yeah, that's fine. They fulfilled our low expectations. But on the other side, we have the absolutely fantastic actions that have been happening on the streets. We have the fantastic strikes that we've heard about, the RMT, the GMB, the hospitality workers and so on that we've talked about. We've had the amazing demo today, which was just absolutely ginormous. I really did not think it was going to be that big. And that has been so energising. And I think that's really given me more hope that I've had for many years, really, that we can actually turn this around by harnessing that power of the people on the street. And I think we shouldn't, that contrast between the leaders and the people on the streets, it's something we shouldn't underestimate. The extent to which actually this COP is showing a real crisis of legitimacy for our leaders. Because after all, they're not denying that the climate crisis is here. They're no longer pretending that it's not happening. But they're in a position where, okay, they're saying, yeah, we face an existential crisis, and we can do bugger all about it. And that, what are they for if they can't actually act on this? Really? So this is actually an existential crisis for them as well as for the planet. And we have to remember that, I think, and we have to allow that to give ourselves confidence when we're building the movement for genuine action on climate crisis. Because as we've seen, we cannot rely on the Tories to implement measures that will actually help. I mean, we know already, they've put out loads of papers recently, we know what they're planning to do, assuming that they don't actually anything at all. And what they're doing basically is saying, well, if you want low carbon solutions, you just have to go out as an individual and buy them. So hence they're talking about electric cars, because people can go and buy an electric car, and that's their answer. They're also doing a lot of magical thinking about carbon capture and storage, because they kind of get out of jail free card. And basically they're turning it round on us. And I don't know if people saw, because it hasn't exactly changed the world, but they have actually launched a campaign to call on us to act on climate change. We have been demonstrating at them for the past decade to do something, and they're going, oh, well, we told you to do something. This is what they've got. So we know that we can't rely on the Tories, because they're not going to implement the sort of collective action, the collective solutions that we actually need. And the thing is, it's not, in many ways, actually all that hard. We all know what needs to happen. We need green energy infrastructure. We need public transport. These things aren't actually beyond the wit of man to implement. But the reason why they can't is because what they're for is for generating profit, is for working through the market. And the market will not deliver those sorts of solutions. So the question really is, well, how do we get a government that's committed to neoliberalism to deliver collective solutions which actually require quite a lot of nationalisation of the energy sector, of transport and so on? And the thing is, we can't wait to elect another government. We know this. We haven't got time to wait for the electoral process to deliver us a team that will actually consider those things. So what we have to be doing is building the mass movement. And this is why, again, I think meetings like this are so helpful, because this is part of building that mass movement that can force the government into doing things that need to be done but they don't want to do. And I think, as other people have said, this absolutely has to be a working class movement, which is why it's so important that we recognise that this is part of the fight against austerity. This is part of the fight for the working class. It can't be a movement against working class people. It has to be a movement that includes the working class people, that is based on working class people. Because the Tories are actually trying to position themselves as the defenders of working class people against climate activists. And if you've seen, they've had some press releases recently where they've talked about, oh, we'll defend your freedom to eat what you like, and we'll defend your lifestyle. You know, they're trying to divide our movement by saying that actually it's not in working class people's interests to deal with the climate crisis. And we have to be the ones who are saying, no, this is actually a working class issue, and we need to build a united mass movement that will fight for collective solutions to the climate crisis, to the crisis of capitalism, to the COVID crisis, to the entire shit show that capitalism has got us into. We have to be building one united movement against all of this. There's a working class movement that is all of us standing together. So thank you very much for coming. It's great to see you all.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, and thank you to everyone who's here. I'm certainly very pleased to be here, and it was a real honour for me to march with my daughters and their friends today with the Youth Climate Strikers. And I would like to absolutely pay tribute to all of them for joining us on the picket lines of the workers yesterday, but also, you know, there were a lot of trade unionists who today went to join them, and that's what it's about. It's about joining up those doors. Our fight is your fight is our fight. We must support each other going forward. And I've been really pleased as well to hear the messages about climate justice and social justice going hand in hand. We've all known that's the case for a long time, but there are many people who don't seem to have got that message. And I absolutely agree that the real hope from this COP hasn't happened inside the steel fences where they talk the talk. It's happening outside the fences where we are walking the walk and taking to the streets, because the fight back to create a real just transition and real social justice is going to start in our workplaces and in our communities, and that is what we need to work on. That's going to take organising, it's going to take meetings like this and talking to each other. It's going to take that realisation that the corporate giants who hijack our terminology, you know, just transition was born in the labour movement. It was a concept set up by US workers who were fighting against things that were being done to their communities by corporate giants and decided to join workers together. We need to take that lesson and not allow other people to steal our terminology. So I am sick and fed up of hearing about corporate giants and governments talking about just transition, talking about fair work, talking about the well-being economy, talking about community wealth building, when our workers are having to take strike action in order to strike for decent pay. Our rail unions played an absolute blinder. I think our workers in local government have played an absolute blinder, and I'm not going to take lectures from the politicians about workers being irresponsible for choosing to use what leverage they can to get the best. Every single member of this movement who has taken strike action, who has been balloted for strike action, and who's prepared to stand up. And I want to say a word for the striking workers in Dundee, at Dundee University, mostly women, who have taken strike action to stop that university from halving their pensions. It is an absolute disgrace that a profitable organisation for purely business reasons can get away with doing that and then call themselves a stakeholder, employer and pillar of the community. We've all got to support those workers. Today was their 10th day of continuous strike action,
So let's make sure they win that support because it is really important that they defend their pensions and win. But I have to say, when workers do take action, they do win in the vast majority of cases. So we do need to think about how we can communicate and collectivise and really start to build that power, because the politicians aren't going to listen to us until we build one big, angry, active movement for change. And that's what this COP is going to help us deliver, because we will link up, we will change things on this planet, and we will change them so that this planet becomes sustainable for people to be able to live on it. Thank you very much.
It's been a fantastic rally. There is going to be a last comment, because we do need to build links, we need to build a movement, we need to build relationships with the trade unions in England as well. So our last comment is going to be some solidarity greetings from Kevin Courtney, who's the General Secretary of the National Education Union.
Thanks very much. Kevin Courtney, National Education Union. We don't organise in Scotland. We stand in solidarity with our sister union, EIS. I'm really pleased to be in Glasgow today. I've come to lobby some politicians, to talk to some school students, and most of all to be on that fantastic demonstration today. And I tell you what, the message I want to say out to people is there is no solution to the twin crises of climate change and ecological degradation that doesn't also solve the problem of poverty. Because if you are on a 0 hours contract in a precarious work, you can't afford to insulate your house, your flat, and your landlord isn't going to do it. And if you are a poor farmer or a poor worker in Africa or Asia burning cow dung to get by, cutting down forests to get by, you need a solution that deals with you. And I tell you the other thing that I see from the treatment that we've seen by these people across the pandemic is they won't do it. They won't go for system change. They could have vaccinated the global south. They wouldn't even waive the vaccine patents. Not even that step. Even though they knew that that would save millions of lives, they don't want to contemplate system change. And we need system change. And this meeting is so fantastic. So inspirational. We have to sometimes argue with the people who are always, who want to look at wet wipes and plastic straws, and it's important that those people are doing what they're doing, but we have to argue for more. We've got to argue with the bosses, with the Prime Minister. We need system change to save our planet. You are doing brilliantly, and you are doing brilliantly. And thanks very much.
Thanks everyone. Look, I know that was a lot of speakers, and there has been some people that have had to leave early, so everyone who has stayed, I mean, to me it's not felt like the number of speakers that we've actually had, because they've all been so good and informative and inspiring. But it does show you the kind of power we've got when we link together and we build the struggles united. I do want to just make one point at the end about the planes and workers. We've been down the picket lines, loads of people from all sorts of organisations have been down the picket lines. It's been the most inspiring of strikes. It's really lit a fire under the whole question of the COP conference, and the links that have been drawn between the climate movement and the trade union movement throughout have been absolutely inspiring. There's been environmentalists from Pakistan down at the picket lines, there's been student organisers down at the picket lines. It's been absolutely brilliant to see. We did have our planes and workers scheduled to speak tonight, but they've had some important meetings to deal with this evening. They've sent us solidarity meetings. We are going to send them back to them. If their action continues, as we hope it does, until they get their victory, which they absolutely deserve, dignity, respect, fair pay, and all the rest of it, then we'll be with them every step of the way. My last comment really is this, is that tonight's event, the People's Assembly, is an organisation that's trying to put together our struggles like we've done tonight. If you are in a position to scan the leaflet that's on your chair, to make a donation towards the organisation to help towards events like this, that would be great. We are going to take this forward in Glasgow, so we will be in touch with everyone who's here. And I do want to say thank you to a few people. First to Sophie Johnson, who had the foresight to book this room on this night during this particular moment in time, because I tell you, getting a venue is not an easy thing to do. So thanks very much to Sophie, who's a student here. Thanks to everyone that's been out leafleting. Jamie has been brilliant. He's come along to actually record this. So there's going to be a recording of all the speeches put together in a video so that we can send that round as well. And thanks to everyone who came along tonight. It really does mean a lot that people did come, and I hope you've all taken something from it. And we'll see you on the streets tomorrow as we take the fight forward. Okay.